Okay, good morning and welcome. Thank you all for coming to this session titled Using Updated CAPSUL and DOP Tools for Administrator Induction. My name is Erin Kepke. I'm from the California Department of Education, and it's my honor to introduce our speakers for today, our presenters. We have Heather Matson. She's a Senior Research Associate from the California Comprehensive Center at West Ed. And we also have Dr. Stephen Winlock, Executive Director from the Sacramento County Office of Education Leadership Institute. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Heather.
So just welcome. Thank you all for coming. Again, my name is Heather Matson. I work for the California Comprehensive Center at West Ed. And the California Comprehensive Center is one of 15 federally funded centers. And our specific task is to support the California Department of Education and the CTC on their efforts. And so I specifically work on their educator excellence efforts. And I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Dr. Winlock.
Thank you, Heather. And my name is Steve Winlock, and I'm the Executive Director of the School of Education, actually, which houses our Leadership Institute that we do and focus on the training and involvement of administrators from the preliminary area as well as the clear credential. Been in education for a number of years, superintendent of elementary for Elk Grove School District for 20 years, and principal training, and then the CSLA. I don't know if you all remember the ATC that we're focused on administrative training, director training for here in Sacramento. So with all of that, my focus has been a lot around understanding and working with leadership development, and work a lot in this region. So we'll be able to talk about how these capsules are a part of what we do.
Just to make sure, it sounds like everyone in this room is probably pretty familiar with the capsule, but I just we talk a lot in acronyms around here, and I just wanted to make sure that we're all really clear what this acronym is, the California Professional Standards for Education Leaders. And already plural, the way it says, so you don't ever have to say capsules. I have a colleague who's Karen Kearney, some of you might know, former director of the CSLA, who was one of the originators of these, and capsules just drives her crazy, so just to let you know. Linda and Tom and Superintendent Hurlickson all mentioned this morning Greatness by Design, which was the report by the Educator Excellence Task Force that came out in 2012. Really, this presentation on the capsule and the DOP, or the descriptions of practice, could have fit in a lot of these chapters because they really are a tool for leaders, both in preparation, also in ongoing professional learning. We chose to do an induction session because that's what the CTC has been focusing a lot on, and that was sort of a catalyst for refreshing both the capsule and the DOP. So that's why we put this session in the induction strand, but it really could have fit in preparation or professional learning, even a piece of evaluation. So these tools are something that can be used throughout the career continuum. The original capsule were written in 2001 and released, and were used really widely, statewide. But then really kind of as an outgrowth of the Greatness by Design report, and just because it had been over a decade, there was a need to think about an updating of the capsule. And we really like to call it a refresh or an update. We don't like to call them the new capsule because they really are connected to the original. You'll see they have the same footprint as the original when we go through it. And one of the big reasons for that was because they were so well used in lots of districts and preparation programs that we didn't want to do something that was a complete departure that would make it really challenging to align it. Also, the big concepts of the capsule are actually in California legislation, and so that was another reason we really wanted to stick to the original. But one thing that was really important, so there was a panel that helped refresh the capsule that was convened by the CTC and the CDE. And one thing that was really important to the panel was a really increased emphasis on equity, access, and opportunity. And so you'll see that while we didn't make a standard of equity, there's still the 6 original standards, equity and opportunity and access are woven really, we hope and think, really boldly throughout the new capsule. And then just there are some terms that obviously you use in 2001 that feel a little bit outdated in 2014, so we did a lot of updating of that. And then we added a new organizational structure, which I'm going to go into more depth about. So did people have a chance to do this beginning prompt to write down a few things, or at least think of a few things of what you'd be looking for in a new leader? Do we have a chance, or do you need another kind of moment of think time? Raise your hand if you need another moment of think time. No? Okay. So this was just basically an activity to introduce you to the big categories of the capsule and to show you that a lot of the qualities that you think of when you think of a beginning administrator really do already fit in these. I think some of the ones you mentioned, systems thinker, something like that, might run throughout all of them, but I tried to put them in the categories that were kind of the most obvious. And so again, these kind of 6 categories or footprint, that's what we were left with as a panel and those of us that were supporting the panel to make sure that we addressed. But as I mentioned, we really tried to address format even with these capsules. So for example, the original capsule, those original standards were the same, but they didn't have a title. It was just number 1, and then it would be a long sentence about how a leader would implement vision. So even to those little tweaks, like making sure that each standard had a title above it, just to make things a little bit easier for those of you that are using it in the field, so you can not have to remember standard 1, 2, 3, 4, but you could say family engagement, family and community engagement, rather than standard 4, are some of the tweaks that we made to the format. So like I mentioned, these are the big categories, and the green document on your table, it's a little gift from us, which is a nice, what we call a fold over of all of the capsule in one kind of easy, so along, and that's something that I'm going to talk a little bit more about where you can access more of these, but actually we have a little bit of a small group, so we can have some extras walk away with you today. Okay, so again, the updated format is going to provide 3 levels of specificity. The first one being the standard, which is really that broad policy statement. Then we move into the element, which are these chunks underneath. And then something that's really new for this version of the capsule are indicators of practices. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each one. And just as a sample, we're going to use Capsule 2, Instructional Leadership, I think is one that people focus on a lot. So you can see that the first broad standard statement, if you open up your booklet to Standard 2, so this is the one that's the top in green is the standard statement, which reads, education leaders shape a collaborative culture of teaching and learning informed by professional standards and focused on student and professional growth. So again, really big picture, that broad policy statement. It would be hard, I think, with a new principal candidate to say, this is what I want you to do, go make it happen, right? You need a little more detail underneath that. And in the original capsule, there was not a lot more detail underneath that. So the next level down underneath that are the elements, and that's where we really kind of chunk out the broad categories within that standard. And it kind of is a bridge from the broad policy level down to the indicator level. So for example, in Standard 2, the 3 big chunks that we thought would come under instructional leadership are professional learning culture, curriculum and instruction, and assessment and accountability. So that kind of starts giving you a little more fleshing out, if you're meeting with a candidate or a new principal, what these elements are. And I should say, it's really easy for me to fall into referring to these candidates as principals. But as you all know, the capsule are supposed to be relevant for anyone that would be getting a credential, an administrative credential. So that could be a principal, a nurse, a librarian. There's lots of other categories that the capsule apply to. We really use it a lot with principal candidates, and so sometimes I fall back into that. But the capsule are clear to say education leaders, and so you won't see principal written here. And so we did a better job in writing than I might do verbally today, but just know that it's applying to everybody. And then the last level, down, this is really down to a detail that used to be only in the descriptions of practice. We brought actual example indicators into the capsule this time to really make a full picture of what we're looking for, what this practice looks like in action. And they actually form the basis for the descriptions of practice, which I'll talk about next. But one thing I want to be clear about, the panel that developed these new refreshed capsule, we went into a great deal of detail about the indicators because there was really a fear that people would think that somehow the indicators were like the definitive list and some kind of checklist. So we went with calling them example indicators. I want to really make the point that you in your own local context might actually modify them, add to them, highlight some that you really want to focus on. I know that in Steve's program, that's an area where you put some emphasis, right, Steve?
We do. In fact, in the preliminary piece, it's that we use that our participants have to discuss or choose one of the indicators to really discuss how would they now implement it, because we do see it as the action and the practice. So at the end of each of the courses, they have to choose one of those indicators and then to discuss the implementation concepts and processes in order to make it happen.
Thanks. Okay, and so you can see we're going to just continue the example of Standard 2, and I didn't put all of the indicators up here on the slides, but just an idea of, okay, so we've gotten to professional learning culture. That gives us a little bit more of a sense of what might be happening under instructional leadership, and then to even give you some more detail under professional learning culture. So, for example, some of the things that you heard Linda Darling-Hammond speak about today, that it's coherent, research-based professional learning aligned with the vision and goals for educator growth. So it's not that one-stop, spray and pray? Yes. I was getting all my cliches mixed up in my head. And then 2A, to promote professional learning plans that focus on real situations, so that's job-embedded work, and specific needs related to increasing the learning of staff and students. So there's really that focus on everybody's learning and growing at the site. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to descriptions of practice. So the descriptions of practice are really, again, another level of fleshing stuff out. And for those of you that have asked, when is the new version of this available? I have two answers for you. One is WestEd has actually printed this version already, and it's available for sale on our website for, I think, about $12, and there's an ebook for more like $9. And this version actually is the only one that has this special cool little fold over that we're giving to you today. But there is going to be a free PDF available on the CTC's website coming soon. Unfortunately, I just talked to someone from CTC today and don't have a more firm answer for you. And for those of you that are administrator preparation programs, the CTC is actually going to be mailing you your own booklets, and I don't have a firm answer for you on when that's going to happen either, so I apologize for that. But if you, if you want just a copy or two in the meantime, feel free to go to the wested.org site, and they're there for you, and they, as you can see, really turned out beautifully, and you're welcome to check this out afterwards. Yeah. Right, you can buy the ebook for less, but the free PDF coming soon. No, because that's something complicated. We couldn't make it available on the WestEd site. CTC wanted to have that available on their site for sale. And some, if you have a program, you will receive free copies of the books. If you don't, then not. You cannot at this point. Yes. Yes, no, feel free to take extras, and we can talk more about that afterwards. Otherwise, I'll have to carry them back to the Bay Area, so I'm happy to give them away to you. Okay, so the descriptions of practice, we're really trying to think about what does leadership look like in action, and to help you think about what people at different levels of their career, not necessarily beginning or experience, but just someone who's really doing one aspect well and maybe needs improvement in another aspect. So we'll talk a little bit more about the continuum, but we're really trying to, again, flesh this out for everybody. One of the things that was actually kind of tricky for the panel, and for those of us supporting the panel this year, for who are refreshing the descriptions of practice, is that when the original descriptions of practice were written based on the original capsule, there were no indicators, no example indicators. So that level of detail kind of just came into the descriptions of practice. But when we went to rewrite these this year, there was already so much detail in the capsule that it was hard to make the descriptions of practice even more descriptive, but we really did our best to flesh them out even more. Sometimes we'd say, gosh, why did we write that indicator so well? Because now we have to write it differently. So again, the capsule are kind of coming to a consensus about the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that you need for school leadership. The DOP extend the standards. They're organized around the capsule, which you'll see, we're gonna look at that. They define the expectations behind each leadership standard really more specifically. And they identify research-based behaviors, so it's a little more clear. You might actually kind of get a picture of what the administrator is doing. And they show you across a continuum what it looks like if you're just getting the hang of something as opposed to being really expert. We like to say that as administrators grow from managers to effective leaders, you can see that progression across the continuum. And they really go into detail about each element. So back to when I was explaining this structure, the element is sort of the middle level, and the descriptions of practice go into great detail about each element, and we're gonna look more closely at that. And together, they really provide this common language and common concepts that serve kind of various and overlapping purposes. Really all, back to Linda's point this morning, really all to show you all the activities that are possible in a really comprehensive professional learning system that's creating great education leaders. So they can be used as a starting point for credentialing criteria or assessments, and that's a really common use for them. A guide for leadership preparation, induction, or professional learning. I think that some programs are doing that really extensively. That's probably an area that can continue to grow. A basis for clarifying performance expectations. So some districts use that to show their leaders, this is what we expect of you as a leader in our district, and we're gonna work on this together in a collaborative process, but know that this is what we're looking for. And again, leaders can use this as a tool for self-reflection. And that can be a really important way to set some professional goals. Okay, so a really key, we that supported the panel, and then therefore the panel, because we kind of drilled it into them, became really obsessive about language, both in the capsule and in the descriptions of practice, because we knew this was going to be an important tool for everyone, and we wanted to be really specific about our language. So I actually want you to take on your table the professional learning culture example that you have, the one-pager. And this gives you a good sense of what it looks like inside the description of practice book that I held up for you. So let me just walk you through this. Each element of the capsule is listed here, so professional learning culture, and it has a little narrative, and that doesn't exist in the capsule. That's another way that we try to even just more clearly tell you what we think a professional learning culture is. So that's what that green paragraph is. And then it has the example indicators of practice. And then we really use this as the basis for, if you turn it over, this is what we call the continuum of practice. And so I just wanted people to take a moment and look at the verbs, adverbs, and adjectives in each of the levels and kind of see what you notice. See what you notice about those words. And I'll just give you a couple minutes to maybe underline them, or because we have plenty of extra copies, so feel free to underline it on that copy and take a fresh one if you want. Okay, so as you notice, the levels are is directed toward, approaches, meets, and exemplifies the standard. So what are some things you might have noticed in directed towards about any of the, especially the verbs there? Did you notice anything? Yes. More at a presenting than collaborative. And you might be able to hear each other. I'm just going to repeat us for the video. Anything else about the directed towards? So this is someone that's at the end of the continuum where we want to move them along to the right side. Yes? Beginning to use, yeah. And you'll notice like words like aware of or understands, right, in that level. And not as much conversation in that level about with staff or collaboratively. It's more the leader doing on his or her own. And maybe we don't need to go through each level, but as you progress up, what are you noticing about some of the words, some of the verbs or adverbs or adjectives? Yeah, so building on, so there's a system that exists already, and this leader is actually ratcheting that up to the next level. Any other words that popped out at people or concepts from the words? Yeah, there's a differentiation. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll see it in the beginning ones in terms of, to elaborate on Lisa's point, the working with staff even. There might be like a few key staff members in some of the earlier levels. And then as you move to exemplifies, it's really what I think everyone's notion of distributed leadership is, that it's a group of staff that are able to even take some of this on their own. We really tried in the higher levels to use words like systemically, strategically, leveraging. I mean, all those things that show that systems are in place and this person is really just integrating to the highest level. And in the directed towards, it really is someone who maybe did a great job learning in their preparation program, but isn't able to sort of implement it effectively yet, especially with a whole staff kind of view. Or even it doesn't necessarily mean someone that's fresh out of their preparation program, but maybe 6 standards is a lot. There's a lot encompassed in each of those standards. So maybe a leader is really great at involving their staff in professional learning, but they're not as great in the assessment area or one of those other features. So we really tried to be really clear and careful with our words, and so hopefully that will help you as you try and use it in your work. And then just want to say that we did say this can be used as a tool by supervisors, both in programs or in districts, and also as a tool for self-reflection, but it really is not designed to be an evaluation, especially not a summative evaluation. It can't be used as a standalone tool for evaluation. That these really are descriptions of practice, not prescriptions of practice is the way we try and say it. And they lay out a set of ideas to help you examine and reflect upon. But again, it's not a valid tool for evaluation. If it really was an evaluative tool, there would have to be sort of a not doing it level, and that's not a level that we wrote. And we really also did try and leave room in here for people to still adapt it to your local context. So if there was some interest in using it as part of your evaluation system, some more work would have to be done to it. But we do think it really is a useful tool for conversation about where you think your leaders are and where they think they are and how they can grow. But again, not as a standalone summative tool for evaluation. So Steve's going to talk a lot about how it's used in action in his program. Before I hand it over, and feel free to ask later, but just to check and see if there are any questions before that. Okay, I'm going to turn myself off and unhook myself.
I have to say that when I was listening to Linda Darling-Hammond talk about the retention of teachers, and you could substitute a lot of the things that she said and say the retention of leaders could also be the issue about them understanding what the issues having. When she talked about teachers are staying at a school based on the principal, I think principals are staying at a school based on the teachers, right? So there's all of that kind of real connection, and I think part of what the leadership standards have done is that it allows us to kind of know what is the work. Someone mentioned about understanding the understanding what the job is. Well, the standards state what the job, what the work is in all of those different areas. This is what we expect. This is what it looks like. I think that our work, as we start to look at with preliminary, those aspiring, is to have them have an understanding of what the work is, developing their skills so that they then can apply these areas. And the standards and also the DOP has helped us in kind of in that leadership development. So when you look at it, it's what's in place. This is what we're saying. We're saying in Standard 1, when you look at the vision area, what are we saying? First of all, we're saying you need to have vision, right? And you also need to say where it is, what it looks like. It says facilitating the growth. Do any key words jump out at you as when you talk about this standard? What is it asking them to do around vision? Any terms jump out at you as you look at that standard? You know what? The key part is here when it says facilitate the development and the implementation. You know what? That's what we're asking leaders to do. And it's developing that skills that's a part of it. We focus, as the elements have kind of pointed out, that it's student-centered, it's developing shared, it's vision, planning, and implementation. So this standard really kind of has outlined, when we talk about vision, this is what it means that you need to be in place. So let me just kind of share with you that in our preliminary program, it focuses on developing and building knowledge of the standard. So we work really hard to make sure that's a piece that's involved. The use of the knowledge and understanding is needed to implement the theories and concepts. Because part of this work with preliminary is not only just understanding what they are, but then how do you implement the concepts and stuff that are a part. And then this piece, developing of abilities of analysis of impact, of relationships, timing, situations. We're developing that piece, which we know is an important part about leadership. So I wanted to kind of just explain, just very quickly, in a nutshell, our program on the preliminary is based on coursework. They have they have Saturdays that they deal with in coursework. So in the coursework, they're looking at the piece about understanding the concepts and the theories, and we look at change. We look at a variety of different areas. So those are on Saturdays. Our program is actually 10 months, okay? They go every other Saturday for the rest of their lives. You went through our program, right? And so, but we have instructors come in, there's certain areas, but the leadership standards guide what the coursework is what we're looking at, okay? Then we have what we call online. This is the application of some of the concepts to theories. They have chat times that happen every week in community groups. They're coached by online principals. We have over 65 principals in our region that we hire to be online chats. And what we do is post scenarios to say this is a situation as it relates to the vision standard. And they chat about how they would solve that, what things they would look at, what things they need to look and implement. They're then coached in their chatting about ideas from those that have been skilled, have done that. And these are sitting principals, these are people that have been involved in the principalship, these are online coach. They then write what they do after they're done with their chat. They write what we call their final statement. So they do their chats in groups of 4 in community with a coach during the week. Then they go offline and they do what we call your final statement. That's where they have to then discuss their own individual application of making that concept or dealing with that scenario. Okay? So at the end of their program, they're required at each course, they write what we call an end of the course paper, and it's for each of the modules. And the rubric is, there's 4 areas they focus on. They have to write about what is their knowledge that they've gained from this course about that standard. Okay, so they write about what their knowledge is based on, whether concepts, theories, things that they now know and understand, so we're building their knowledge. The next thing that they write about is they choose one of the indicators that we've listed or they may make up an indicator that's similar to those indicators that are there, and they write about their implementation of that indicator, okay? Because we're trying to get the idea about, how do you implement? And when they write about implementation, they have to look at all of the course concepts, the things that are apart. They have to really look at what does it take to implement that particular indicator, okay? That's putting the action in the words. And then finally, they write about what do they need to learn more of. We know in our coursework that we're not going to be able to cover everything that's a part. So what we're asking for them to do is to write, based on this, what things do you think that you need to learn more about, that you need to have some more understanding of? So they do their own self-analysis about things I'm not going to know based on that standard. When it says facilitate, maybe I need to learn more about what facilitating needs to do, okay? So our coursework is guided by the standards in this particular case that helps us in kind of getting at these pieces. Last thing, they also use what we call our leadership frameworks. We have chosen 9 textbooks that every course uses. And those textbooks are ones that are, for instance, the change process with Michael Fullan. We use The Principle, Leadership on the Line, Courageous Conversations, Mohammed's School Culture. We use Motion Leadership. There are 9 what we call textbooks. Every course uses those, some aspect of those that are part of it. Why do we do that? Because when you look at the piece about developing the leadership skills, there's this piece about understanding about if you are looking at introducing new curriculum, you've got to also understand the change process in introducing it. You also have to understand, why do we do courageous conversations? You have to understand when we talk about the achievement gap and those things are apart, how important that is to understand curriculum involvement. So we have what we call leadership frameworks that they work to the text. We also use, for instance, the ladder of influence is a leadership. You got to understand what you do. We also use what we call the working triangle of leadership. And you may have seen a version of this in some ways that in your leadership, you have to constantly look at in leadership, you're going to have to develop your knowledge in certain areas and things. And then you're going to have to translate, once you know that piece, you got to, what's your leadership going to be around that, okay? And then what's your relationships around that. So this is a framework. For instance, you all know the book Good to Great, which is one we use a lot. Having the best, that's the knowledge that we know, that in order to have good to great, you got to have the best team, right? But one of the things that happens on that is that the bus pulls up. Who's on the bus is one of those major concepts. Guess what? The bus pulls up and it's full with a few people, right? That you didn't count on, right? So your leadership still has to be in that piece about how do you still get the best team, the movement, the involvement. So we use this as one of the leadership frameworks that constantly, you got to build your knowledge and you got to look at your leadership to get at that concept that's a part. And then you also have to understand your relationships. Your relationships is a piece about not only just is it you and I, but it's a relationship to the time, the situation, all those kinds of things are involved in understanding my leadership. If I'm a new administrator at that, I can understand that's a relationship piece that you have to understand. That you don't come in and say, okay, I'm going to change everything right away, and then guess what? They change you, right? You got to be strategic. You got to look at what that piece is. That's the relationship that we work with. So in this particular piece, the standards guide the work. And I have to say, I've been in this working with this for a long time, and I feel like these standards are the best for us to understand and articulate what the work is and what's a piece. And so our program is modeled around those pieces. Any questions on that? Make sense? So it's a lot of theory, application. So they do, in a course, they'll do 4 or 5 chats in that course that are involved with you went through it, right? Chatted a lot in their communities. But they got to actually apply that information to the work that they're doing and look at. So let's talk about Now the use of examples of the indicators. If you were to look at some of these really clear indicators, in the piece about it says what the work is, what it looks like, you got to cultivate multiple learning opportunities, which is an important piece in that standard. It says that's what it looks like when you're dealing with vision, okay? So it actually outlines that kind of areas that are involved doing that. Here's what I'd like you to do for a minute. I want you to think about your own leadership. You're in a first time, you're an aspiring, you're hoping to get the job that's a piece. And I want you to think about one of those indicators that we just looked at, just quickly. You can do that with your table. This is a team effort. If you choose one of those indicators, based on that and thinking about the working triangle of leadership, the knowledge that you may have to build in order to make sure you're implementing that, what would it be? What would be the leadership piece that would be a part, the skills that would have to be translated in order to make that happen? And then finally, what relationships would you be involved? So how about just, let's just do one of those. Choose either one of those, a couple of you together, if you wouldn't mind, and just kind of walk through the application of the triangle as it relates to the indicator. Yes, thank you. You have that right there. So let's just take a moment. Just as in pairs, pick one of those indicators that you'd like to work on together. And the indicators are also on there too, the example indicators. So choose one of those under vision and think about, based on that indicator, what's the knowledge that I would need to build in order to look at about that? Yes, thank you. What's the knowledge? Just take a moment. Which indicator did you choose? Okay? You have to look at, so here's more knowledge that I have to build in that implement. So you get how this is kind of used. So based on that, let's just stick with that particular one. If we now were to look at, are there leadership skills that now I would need to have in order to implement that indicator? What do you think?
Well, my background is in my role, I have to be doing that.
Uh-huh.
I'm now working with coaches and site administrators.
Okay,
So I have to develop
great.
that will help
Okay,
relationships.
perfect. Perfect in that sense about those are leaderships in order to get to that piece as you look at that. Did you hear that? Great, perfect. Any relational information comes to you for that in looking at that implementation?
Well, they are new relationships, so I have to build on them.
Okay. You have to identify this is a new relationship, so that in its sense is one that you're going to have to look at about how you do that. Building the trust, all the stuff that comes in with building a relationship. So what we do is to help look at how do we implement. Let's just take one more. How about yours? You look like, what indicator did you all choose? Did anybody choose one different than what they did? Okay. Do you guys mind if I go over here? Okay. Yeah, hurry is what you said. I get it. Okay. What A4 is what? Read that indicator. Okay. So that expectation. So in knowing that, that's the indicator. What's the knowledge that I would have to build to help that happen that I may need to know more about? Got to know the standards. Okay. Great. Which is the leadership piece of that, that you move into. Any relational information that you'd have to be aware of?
Where do I find the VP and push? And
Yes. Yes. Belief systems may be a part of that because you've got to look at that. One of the books that we use in the framework in this is called Leadership on the Line. Have you read that? It's a great book that sometimes you got to be on the balcony and sometimes you got to be on the dance floor. And sometimes in leadership, you got to pull back and see the big picture and see how it works. Sometimes you got to get right on the dance floor and do the work in the same way. But as a leader, if you can't go back and forth, the issue is you get stuck. And you find leaders that sit right there in that place and they're always on the dance floor while the fires happen all around because they haven't pulled back to kind of look at that piece with that. And we talk about that. How do you do in your balance, in your leadership of doing both? Okay? So that's that concept of looking at how we use that. Does that make sense? Okay? So let me go to the clear credential because we want to make sure. So in the clear credential, the program focuses on the development of the leadership as the work is being accomplished. So job embedded, as you know, much more. It's also the description of practice assists from this theory into practice because you're actually doing the work, and that's when you look at the DOP. The DOP describes what's happening as you're implementing or you're involved in this particular vision. So that's why this is really great, and it helps us. We actually give the DOP to the principal. They have to, the person that is in the CLEAR program, they take an assessment about where they are in relationship to each of the standards based on the DOP. This is self-reflection, right? Okay. They do it 3 times. She was not a plant, just so you know. She's in our CLEAR program. But since she's here, I'm going to use her. Okay? So the piece is they do it at the very beginning of the program, and they do it at the first year when they finish the 3rd capsule, and then they do it at the very end. So they look at what has been their progress as they move through and kind of give some understanding. So let me kind of explain in the last piece. It's building on the knowledge and skills that they've gained, and then it's this piece about their implementation while they work on their leadership. So it's, you know, in some ways it's changing the tires, the car's moving, right? They're in the job, they're working on, here's what it looks like. So let me just briefly kind of explain our model. And the standard guides to the program, it's a 2-year program or 6 capsules. They take 3 months for each capsule. What they do is they develop, it's that application to work. They develop what we call a practicum in that capsule. So they're at their school site. They're in Vision, which is the capsule and suppose that they're in. They develop a job-embedded practicum that says this is what I'm going to work on. And the practicums could be some of the things that you all talked about that may be in the area of knowledge building I'm working on. It may be it could be knowledge, it could be actual implementation, but they have to develop a practicum. In that practicum, this is where someone mentioned about someone has to have, understanding of strategic planning and some of those kinds of things that are a part of the work. They develop an action plan about their involvement, about how that practicum is going to be implemented in that 3-month period. Okay? That makes sense. During that time, their practicums, they have an action plan. We've created a whole online program that gets at, we're trying to get at the piece about strategic planning. You got to have action steps to move toward that implementation. It's all part of their program when they do this. So they do a practicum based on the standard and based on the work that they're in, the school that they're in, their involvement that's a part of it. And let me tell you that an action plan can be in a lot of areas when we talk about vision. Doing a development of a school handbook is a part of helping getting the vision across. So that could be their practicum. So we look at, they look at what are the elements of that standard, they look at their work as it relates to vision, and then they develop that practicum that's a part. They also have a coach. Their coach is assigned to them. They have, in the practicum plan,
They have, during this 3-month period, they have 4 required times of meeting. Now, there's extra that's involved, but there's 4 required. One is for them to meet with their coach to develop what that practicum can be. Then there's 2 progress meetings that are part of that, where they meet during this 3-month period, the times that they will meet to see where am I moving with that, what input do I need, what changes as I'm working toward implementation of it, and then they do a final meeting as a review. Now, there are also we actually have other coaching time that's outside of that formal time because, as you know, you can't always, in the implementation of content, doesn't just happen on Tuesday at 5 o'clock when I said it was going to happen. They also have a red line to the coach to assist them as they're working through that 3-month period. So they develop practicums, there's coaching, there's implementation, as I mentioned, each standard is 3 months. So they do a standard, 3 months, they do another standard. We are building their portfolio from this electronic practice that sees that how they are moving through their development. They're also, again, as I mentioned, the assessment of the DOPS. The DOP is used to kind of look at the assessment each time. Where am I? Am I moving through? They use that also, the DOP, when they have done a practicum, and they look at it from the idea about if there's an area and I'm moving into a standard that I'm not sure as much or I don't have as much skill in, because I've kind of listed that as moving toward that, understanding that standard. They develop a practicum that's going to help them in gaining more skill and step. And that's what the coach kind of helps them. Let's look at your DOP as you do the next one. Where are you? What are some of the things that you may need to learn more about? Let's build a practicum that allow you that opportunity to work through that. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's how it works with that. You'll notice, again, the practicum is an experience that requires the conceptual application of theory or conceptual knowledge. We built the practicum based on what the medical model does. The medical model, you have practicum hours that you have to do is, to make sure that you don't kill the patient, but you've looked through it, you've kind of worked through it, you have a coach there as you're working through it. It's what instructional rounds is built around. It makes sense? A lot of ways. It's the development of the transfer skills. So you've gained this knowledge, you've looked at what kinds of things, you're now in the job. Let's start to translate what it is that's being expected of you based on the work that you're in right now. Okay? So that's a piece that's a part of that. Then there's the reinforced academic and technical skills. Many of our participants have been in our prelim program, and now they've moved to our CLEAR program. So as I outlined in the prelim, there's a lot of understand knowledge that you're building, and we're trying to applicate, but you know what? The only application they have sometimes of those skills are the online chats in some ways. I forgot to mention in the prelim, they're required to do a leadership project, that they have to pick for the year that is somehow involves they have to choose the elements, the standards that it addresses. They have a district coach as their implement, could be their principal, could be someone in that area, but they work on that all year, and then they present this leadership project at the end of the year to our educational community, which are 3 to 4 members, superintendents, principals, and then they give feedback to them about their program. So I'd like to just take a moment and let's just kind of outline based on Standard 1, or the vision. If you were a principal of a K-8 and you were thinking about practicums that you'd have to do, you just got the job, you're a principal of K-8, you're in Standard 1, what do you think are some of the practicums that you might want to be doing that you could build that as you're working in your CLEAR? Let's just do that as a group. Any thoughts? What would be some of the practicum? You just got the job, you're a principal of a K-8, you're in the vision standard. What would be an example of a practicum that would begin to start to address your work around Standard 1? Any ideas? Okay, who was the principal? Please, sir.
It might be to create a questionnaire that can go out to staff about what kind of school they want.
Okay, great. So you're going to look at that staff involvement. That could be your whole practice, maybe a little bit more. So not only just the issue about what you do with, once you get the questionnaire, what are you going to do with it, how information you're going to share, how you're going to incorporate it. It's a great practicum, especially for new principals that are coming in, understanding it. So that's a practicum. Another concept, another practicum. If you're a K-8 principal, anybody been a K-8 principal or elementary principal, middle school? So you know when they called you and said, you've got the job, you went there and put your pictures up and put your name on, and then you thought, okay, where do I go? What do I do? What's the work, right? Yeah. Well,
So, I think since we know relationships are key, and some of my mentors said that when leaders stumble, it's usually in the area of relationships.
agreed.
And so what's really important is getting to know your community, your staff, and so figuring out a way of doing that. What might that look like?
That could be your practice. That could be your practicum. You know, I do a workshop called The First 90 Days. You all have read the book. And we translate it into the work of what principals do, because in the first 90 days, it talks a lot. So much about you got to understand who your community is. How do you start to do that? What does that look like? How do you translate it? So we work with them about doing, I call lesson plans for first 90 days. It's like the president. You know, the first 100 days, we judge them on all that. But that's your idea of that. That's a great practicum in the area of vision, because that's what we're asking people to do. Okay? So again, the DOP in that particular one is used to look at my growth in that area. With me, my coach, we do a mid-program review where I'm involved, the coach is involved. We do a triangular conference where we look at what's been your development, where are you going, what should you be focused on, and then that development of practicum. So that's our use of the frameworks, using the leadership standard, using the DOP. It has been just terrific, I think, in guiding our program. So, questions? Okay, any questions? Well, again, I just want to underscore that we just met on Friday. You know, there's going to be a requirement for the prelim program that there be an assessment that's given for everyone in order to actually move to get your prelim credential. And the implementation of that, they're looking at they're going to do a field testing on the year 17-18 with an actually implementation for everyone 18-19. Just so if you're planning your retirement or that kind of stuff, you can kind of know your timeline. Don't go there. Okay, but just in case. But one of the things that we talked about was, how do you assess? How do you assess that someone has the information? And that's what we met on. We talked about all the assessments of our different programs that are happening in the state. How are we assessing? You know, someone has accomplished that. And I have to say, for us right now, it has been really, you can tell that someone has started to gain from their writing and what they've done with the development of their knowledge that's a part, the end of the program. You know that when they're looking at, this is what I do, their chats, and I have to tell you, chats have really, they really are developmental. You should see their chats in the very beginning versus the chats toward the end. As the coaches say to me, they don't need me anymore in the end, because they're all kind of looking at, because part of that is the analysis of the situation. How do you look at it? What do you bring in? And how do you help yourself in kind of moving to that implementation? So we keep transcripts and all those kinds of things that are involved. It's very exciting to watch. But I think that the DOPS, they have been an incredible tool to help us in guiding our program, which is what I've been wanting to kind of share with you, and the leadership standard. So, well, thank you.
Thank you so much.